Okay, and our final session of the day is entitled College and Career Planning Open Forum. So as the title suggests, this is an open forum. We're sharing, we're talking, we're asking questions, and learning from each other. So we'll have 2 microphone carriers roaming the room. But let's start by introducing our panelists. First we have Ann Doyle, who is a vocational rehab counselor from Michigan Rehabilitation Services. We have Christy Gao, is that right?
Pretty good. I don't mind what you call me.
Okay.
I just go by Christy.
Okay, Christy, who is a coordinator of disability support services at Oakland University, and Elizabeth Stout, who's a youth consultant with the Michigan Pediatric Epilepsy Project. Can each of you just kind of introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about your experience with epilepsy and your experience with college and career planning? You just got to turn it on. There's a button. There you go.
Hello. So my name is Ann, and I work for the state of Michigan. Actually, it's a federal program. Voc Rehab is throughout the country. And so we help people with disabilities with their employment-related needs, whether that's like vocational counseling, obtaining accommodations in the workplace. So in this context with college planning, I work with people to help them figure out what their strengths are, meaning like what kind of job would you be good at, what does the labor market say, what kind of accommodations do you need, how do we address the disability-related needs in the workforce. And then I also work with employers to help them with disability awareness and kind of providing accommodations for their employees. And my experience with epilepsy is also working with people who have that diagnosis, and I'm also a parent of a child with epilepsy.
And how soon do you, or I guess what's the earliest age that you work with kids through MRS?
So good question. 3 years ago, I'm bad with time. 3 years ago, the federal government started releasing a program that's called Pre-ETS, it's Pre-Employment Transition Services, that's available to students at the age of 14. To my knowledge, MRS is in most public high schools, but whether you go to public school or not, your child can get those services. It's kind of to expose them to the workforce, doing like self-advocacy, work-based learning, so they get a job and get paid. It's like a short-term internship and stuff. And then when they typically move into junior, senior year, they come on to what we call the voc rehab, which is what I do, where they could open a case to help plan for life after high school. But then we also do work with people. I've had people at the age of 87 actually one time on my caseload, so it's not just for youth either.
Okay, great. Christy?
Hello. Hi everybody, my name's Christy Goff with a G. And I work at Oakland University on the main campus, and I'm the coordinator for Disability Support Services. So my role there is that I meet with all families and students that want to come into the university. They've been accepted as a student, so it's not prior to admission, it's after admission. And then I work with them on what kind of accommodations they might need at the college level. A big part of my meeting with those families and students is the difference between high school and college accommodations. There's a lot of difference that happens between the two. And a lot of times students and families don't know that. They think they're going to be pretty similar to what the high school experience was, and most of the times it's not. It's just not the same. So we go through what they might have experienced or used as accommodations in the past, what helps them. Each plan is individualized, so we really look at what their strengths and weaknesses are, but also what the college environment is like and what we have to expect as students and adult learners in that college environment. And then we develop a plan for them. They work with their instructors to use those accommodations and use those plans. We also work with instructors who sometimes have a hard time figuring out how to help students. They don't want to be, like when I went to college, you went to your class, the instructor talked, you took notes, you took a test, you wrote a paper, you took a final, and then you were done. Now it's much different in college, and there's a lot more interaction, and there's a lot more group work, and there's a lot more classroom behavior that happens, and we want to help all of our students to excel at those things. So we work a lot with our faculty to make sure those things can happen as well. When there's issues, problems, concerns, I'm kind of their point person for that, where they might have missed a week of school because they were hospitalized for some reason. What can we do? What professor do we need to talk to? Can we get notes from the class? Can we get homework or assignments taken care of? What can we do at the college level? And then my personal experience with epilepsy is that my cousin Chad has it. He's had it his whole life, so it's more of a personal engagement than it is professional. Professionally at Oakland, right now we would have, we'd like to say between 5 and 10 students registered with our office with epilepsy. That does not mean there are not way more out there. It's just the students that have chosen to register with our office for it. We do classroom accommodations and housing accommodations as well if needed for different diagnoses, but I do know we have housing accommodations for students that have requested them for epilepsy. That's about it.
And just related to that, can you give a quick example of like what an housing accommodation for a student with epilepsy might involve?
Attached bathrooms. You have, you're supposed to call them residence halls now, but I call them a dorm because that's what I lived in. But a residence hall can have community bathrooms where you walk down the hall and you're sharing a bathroom with 12, 13, 14 other students. Or they can have attached bathrooms, which are suite style. So a bathroom, or I mean a room, a bathroom in the middle, and another room, and 4 people share that. Students who have nighttime seizures frequently might need rooms without lofted beds. They might need rooms that have attached bathrooms because if they get a brain fog or groggy or they're having different issues, they need to get to a bathroom quickly or without having to walk 100 yards down the hallway. Bright lights in the middle of the night, that's not always a great thing. Being able to have night lights, dimmer lights, things like that. That would be considered our housing kind of genre of things. Sometimes some students, I'm trying to think other, meal plans, dietary needs. If they have special diets that they're on, they can meet with our dietary professionals in the residence halls and they can make them a special diet plan. It's amazing what those guys and those women can do for a variety of disabilities. If your food can't touch this, can't do this, but I need gluten-free and I can't have this, they do it all. And make sure that those students who are paying for those meal plans are able to get access just like any other student that can eat anything that they want.
Great, thank you. Elizabeth.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Stout, and I am a youth consultant for the Family Center, which is a part of Children's Special Healthcare Services for the state. And I have had epilepsy for 10 years at this point, and my goal is to use my personal experiences with epilepsy to be a voice for all the people and children within the state who have it themselves. Because it can be challenging and can have a lot of effects on your life, but there's definitely help out there to take advantage of to make it easier to live with. And I am now going into my sophomore year at Albion College, and was glad to make it through a whole year without having problems related to my epilepsy, and meaning that it was very important to learn how to deal with having seizures in classes and to explain to professors what I had to do, and just that having a seizure disorder does not mean you can't still be a part of college and have what feels like a normal life most of the time.
Great, thank you. All right, so let's open it up for questions and discussion. Yeah.
I'm just wondering about the whole SAT process and what, we've been advised that if you get accommodations, your child has to sit there the whole time if you request the longer time, and sometimes that's more stressful. I guess maybe Elizabeth, what was your, in high school, the testing and the ACT experience, and did you have accommodations for those tests? And was that a good thing, a bad thing?
I specifically did not have accommodations related to length of time. I did explain to my people who were there when I was taking the test that if I had a seizure, I might need to have some time to recuperate afterwards or have a little time at the end. So it certainly is beneficial to at least tell people the situation and that you might need some accommodations, but I specifically did not have any set up.
There it goes. My son has a learning disability, so he gets accommodations for that. He just took it this year. And yes, they did, I'm not exactly sure why, but they did have him stay for the full time. He's had a few other people in there doing the same thing, having the extra time and a half is usually what they call it. He asked if he could leave to use the restroom, and they let him do that, and he kind of wandered around for a while, so he didn't have to sit in that room for longer. He didn't let them know that. He just, yeah, absolutely. He seemed okay. He did. He went to the bathroom, and I don't think he needed to be in the bathroom for 15 minutes, but I think that's what he did, just to kind of, you know, anxiety affects everything. So yeah, sitting there when all his friends are leaving because they're done and they're getting on the bus and going in their cars, and he's like, wait a minute, I'm still here. I'm being punished because I have to stay here. There was a big conversation of, no, but you got a much better score than you would have without that time. It's a give and take.
Well, an accommodation should always be an accommodation, not a punishment, and not making a situation worse. So for some people, depending on their disability, sitting there for an extended amount of time could actually be a detriment. So I don't know, I don't want to say this because I'm not 100% positive, because the SAT is more of like a political system in a way. But I would really encourage you to do some research on that, if that's actually really required based on disability, because I just cannot imagine that they can make people sit there for an extended amount of time. And I think what happens sometimes is accommodations can get really political, and with that, they want to make sure that they gave you that time. So if you've requested time and a half, they don't want to do anything that can come back to make it look like they did not provide that accommodation. So I would really work with that, and part of that is you can have the neurologist write a letter saying that this is how much time they need. Maybe they don't need time and a half, maybe they need time and a quarter. I don't know, you know what I mean? But an accommodation should be an accommodation, not a punishment.
Hi, my daughter is going to be a senior at Rochester Schools this year. She just did take the SAT. She does get time and a half, and she did think, oh, that's too much time, I don't want to sit there and she used every bit of the time. She was glad she did. She also was very private about being epileptic and realized, wow, Mom, there were all these people in there that I had no idea had similar problems to me, and it just made her feel included really in that group. So the time was a good thing, and I don't know that they can make them. I do remember them saying she has to stay in there during that time, but it ended up being a really good thing for her, so.
I think part of that comes with stigma too, and acceptance of your disorder. It doesn't mean that you actually need all that time. What I think comes worse is the comparison when you know you've needed it, you haven't put in the 504 or the IEP that you needed extended test time. Then when it comes time to apply for it, they don't give it to you, and then you do horrible on the tests, and your self-esteem is then devastated. So I think you got to look at the total picture there and balance it, like you said. What benefit do we have? Sure, there's systems and we have to jump through their hoops and say, yeah, this is just a system they created that works best for us, but it's not individualized towards your needs, you know.
Other questions, comments?
Hello. I had a question in regards to the memory recall issue with the counselor at Oakland University. My daughter has accommodations with extra time and a half in her regular class, but also I was wondering how college accommodates with her notes, with the note taking, because she needs her notes. She takes excellent notes actually, and I'm very proud of that. But how does the college accommodate that without it being looked upon as cheating or you're getting an over advantage?
That's a great question. Especially because in the K-12 area, I don't know how many of your students are in high school. High schools don't tend to teach students how to take college level notes. They do packets, fill in the blanks, things like that. And then these students come to college, and they have a professor in front of them who talks a mile a minute for an hour and 7 minutes or 2 hours long. And these students, disability or not, are sitting there dumbfounded, like, what's happening? Because it's just not what they're used to. Students with disabilities who need note takers, that is one of our most common accommodations. Probably our most common accommodation is the time, extra time. There are so many different things that you could need extra time for that is just our most common one that we give. Our second one is note takers. Note takers are all kinds of different options. One could be that a student is given the ability to record the lecture. Not all professors allow recording of lectures. Some professors think you're going to put it on YouTube and they don't want their voice out there. So they say, no, you cannot record those lectures. We can trump that and allow you to record the lectures. That's more for students who are auditory learners, prefer to rely on only themselves, want to go home, and they take notes best they can in class. They go home, re-listen to the lecture, fill in the spots that they've missed. There's peer note takers. Peer note takers are other students that are in the class that we hire at the disability office to give your student a copy of the notes that they took for themselves. That's more for a visual learner, somebody who does better with seeing things. They get that copy within 24 hours. Most of the time they end up coming with the student right after class using our copy machine for free, because copies aren't free on colleges. And they will say, here, come use ours, I copy it and give it right to them. That works great for visual learners. It works great for students who have a lot of classes and don't have time to re-listen to an entire lecture, all their classes, all the time. So they can do that. Some students they just want a copy of the PowerPoints. And we're probably about a 50-50 at Oakland of some professors provide them and some don't. So we can get those for students if it's a professor that doesn't provide that. And then most of the notes are on there, and then they can just follow along and write their little things that they want to put in there. So we kind of talk with the student about, what do you think? And then at our office, it is never a done process. I tell them that I just have an ego and want to see them all the time. It's not true. I just want them to come back and tell me how it's going. Using a note taker for a math class might be great, but using a recorder might be better. And it might be based on how you learn and what you learn. And having a sociology class, maybe you just need the PowerPoint and you don't need a recorder or a note taker. I just want them to always be reevaluating how they learn and the best ways they learn, so that the things we can help. We can't change curriculum at the college level. We can't change the tests. We can't change the amount of homework. Those are not any things that we at the college level can change or adapt. So the things that we can do, we try really hard to lay that on as much as we can, layer it to help as much as we can. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah. I also found it certainly helps work both with your professor and your classmates. I had a professor in my last semester who talked incredibly fast, and I went up to him and explained, I am not doing very well with taking notes right now because you're talking so fast. Is there something I could have help with? And he said, sure, you can have my PowerPoints. So I type out all the PowerPoints beforehand and then just add on the extra stuff, because otherwise you'd go back through and say, half of these notes don't even make sense, I don't know what it's actually about. And then I also talked to my friends and found out most everybody in the class agreed that we're not getting notes together. So we would have it where you work together and each person would do a different slide so that you only had to focus on one slide, and that made it a lot simpler to try and get everything. And it was a lesson that just because you have a disease process doesn't mean there aren't other people struggling for similar reasons. Don't be afraid to ask your friends or classmates if you can use them as a tool, and maybe if they want to work with you, because you can definitely help them too.
Is there a list or resource of, say, epilepsy-friendly colleges in Michigan, people that really work with them or tout it, as far as resources or maybe like transportation to help people get around?
So One thing I always do in my job is I encourage everyone to go meet her equal, her position at whatever college they're at. Every college has them. Sometimes they call them a different name and they come up with something catchy, but I would refer to it as Disability Support Services. Because the reality is too, in college it's just a lot more private. I mean, when you're in high school, everyone knows where that classroom is. You know, it is what it is. Some schools are better than others in my experience. That's my experience. Some professors are better than others. I think one of the things too, and maybe sometimes these conversations are off the table, I don't know, but especially in your major, you start to learn, and I think that was reality for anybody, disability or not going to college, you start to learn what professors, you know, I had a professor in college, I was a poli-sci major, she liked to argue your grade with you. Like, so if you wanted to go to her office and argue, it was like an episode of Clueless. I could actually argue from a B to an A and walk out with an A. You know, so I was like, she's great, I'm gonna keep taking classes with her. So I think it's no different when it's your disability. Like, you learn what professors are more accommodating than others. And if they're in your major, you'll continue to take classes with them. I don't think necessarily any college is better than the other when it comes to epilepsy. I think sometimes the transportation piece, you know, getting around a college campus can become a real reality, whether you have epilepsy, you have cerebral palsy, MS, you know, all those things that can impact mobility. So sometimes going to a smaller school, there's just less, you know, I'm sure getting around Albion is a little bit easier than getting around Michigan State, right? So, I mean, sometimes those are factors that we take into account, you know, and those are things that sometimes I'm talking to students about too, so.
Oh, I'm so glad you asked this question. All right, so there is a me at every public university and 9.9 times out of 10 every private university. You have to have a me. It's great job security. So what I tell people all the time is that I'm not an admissions advisor. This is like an off the table conversation. I don't care if you come to Oakland or not. I want you to go where you feel the most comfortable. I want you to go where, when you walk into that disability office, you feel like that is a place you can go. It is completely different than high school. High school, K through 12, everybody knows where that classroom is. Everybody knows before you walk into your classroom if you have an IEP or a 504. Everybody in that school has a meeting, you know, your IEP meetings, your 504 meetings. They have those things all before. College is completely different. College, unless you want to use accommodations, you don't have to. You don't have to share a diagnosis. You don't have to share information with anybody. If you do register with our office and you do get accommodations, you can go into your classroom, give your letter to your professor that says, I get extra time in taking a test at the DSS office, and you don't have to say why. There's no reason that comes about that is where you have to share your private information if you don't want to. We have students who will come in and they'll give their letter to their professor and they'll say, Professor, I get these accommodations. How can we work together to do this? Then we have other students who come in and say, hey Professor, these are my accommodations. I have had epilepsy, anxiety, ADHD, learning disability, whatever it is, since I've been in second grade. This is what's happened my whole life. This is what I need. How can we do this together? It is the students' need of what they need to share. Some students are very private. They do not want to meet with a professor unless it is in a private environment like office hours. Other people will go in there and, you know, a professor will say, hey, is there any questions at the end of the first, you know, meeting? And there'll be a student who'll raise their hand with their letter in their hand and say, oh, I need accommodations. What do you want me to do with this? I see it all the time, and I get professors that call me and say, don't tell them to do this. And I say, I tell them not to do it, but they do. They just don't mind if anybody knows. But other people are private. It's up to that student of what they want to share and how they want to share it. And if they feel comfortable coming into my office, then maybe that's a good fit. But if they don't like how it looks to them or feels to them, they call it college shopping, I call it DSS shopping. They should do that. You should never go to a school that you don't feel comfortable getting things that you need and are entitled to by law to get. So if you, at the college level, it's so independent and you have to ask for these things, but if you don't feel comfortable asking for them, why would you want to go there? So if you don't like me when you come in, I tell them all the time, if you don't feel comfortable, you don't, you think I'm goofy, you don't think we're too strict, you think we're too this, too that, please don't go here. Find somewhere that you can walk into that office and a little bit of your anxiety can go down, because that's important. It is so hard to walk into college as an adult, into an office of someone you don't know and say, I need help. It's dumbfounding how hard that is, and everybody just expects them to do it. So, okay, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, I got a question that's probably more geared towards the job market than actual college, but knowing that here in Michigan you're going to be 6 months free of seizures before you can get a driver's license, I'm wondering, are there occupations out there that would have a longer guideline, or wouldn't accept someone at all with an epilepsy background for that job? And also, if there's any legal requirement or no requirement saying that they wouldn't have to divulge they were once epileptic when applying for a job.
So that's like a really good question. I'm going to try to answer all the points that you had in there. So a couple things. The reality is a lot of disability has come a long way. I think that there's still quite a bit of stigma on epilepsy. And the reason why it's fear out of lawsuit. Are you going to get hurt on the job and then sue me? So not that anyone wants to go home and read ADA, because I know it's long, but I do think sometimes going in there and looking at some of the high points, it's a good way to do it, to educate yourself. A part of that is the quick and dirty rule is you never disclose your disability on a job interview. You only disclose after you've been offered the job. I always suggest you get an offer letter, have it in writing, and then you only disclose that to human resources. A lot of people end up disclosing to their boss because it's the person you see. Don't ever do that. But in ADA, it also says that you, as the employee, are legally responsible to write out what kind of accommodations you need. So you can't just go and say, I have epilepsy. So with that, when you look at lawsuits, a lot of time when there's some kind of ADA lawsuit, they're usually debating over the word reasonable. Is it a reasonable accommodation? So if you have active seizures, I don't think being a roofer is a very good idea. Okay? Truck driving is probably going to be really complicated, because if that's your bread and butter, there's really no way to accommodate that if you get your license suspended. Okay? So these get hard. With that, work from home jobs are becoming more and more prevalent. So that's another option. I had one guy, I'm not going to talk about too many details because of confidentiality, but makes a very, very big salary. Got into a computer industry very early on, meaning before they started requiring degrees. So he does not have his degree. He was working at a company, had a grand mal seizure during a major upload, and because of the nature of the company, that computer system needed to be on, and the computer system crashed. And they were able to fire him using the thing as, you don't have your degree, you didn't get your degree, we talked about this a couple years ago, you never went back to school, blah, 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 blah. So they used a non-disability related thing. So does it happen? Yes. But he also never navigated the correct channels to disclose that disability. So in a lot of ways, I do suggest that people disclose their disability, because it, what's the word I want to look? It's your safety net. It can save you later. It's just like with college. You might not ever use those accommodations, but if you go in there after you have an issue with a professor and now you're failing, it's going to be a little too late. So, sometimes that's partly what we look at with people, though, like labor market-wise, like, is transportation going to be an issue? And then here's probably the overwhelming thing I sometimes say to parents of young people, is maybe Michigan not the place to be? And I'm going to be honest with you, as a parent, I don't have those conversations with my son. He's still young, but I never talk about, like, when you drive one day, because I don't know if that's ever going to happen for him. But maybe you're going to have to move to Chicago. Maybe you're going to have to move to Manhattan, where you can get on the subway and get to work, And I know for some parents, they're like, oh my gosh, and they clutch the table in my office and they say, Ann, why are you talking about my son moving out of my house? But this is the reality of sometimes like what we have to navigate. And I think sometimes if we keep thinking like, I have to get in the car to get to work, you're going to really start to cut out a lot of options. Did I answer all your questions?
I think too, and I've had this argument because, well, we live in the car capital of the US, okay? I mean, what's the first form of ID that they ask for when you apply for a job? And trying to explain why you don't have a driver's license in Michigan is extremely hard. It opens up to disclosure, which is none of their business how you get to work. Okay, saying I have reliable transportation there, but that's a tricky issue of disclosure prior to getting the job. And also, right now you have to be cautious because there are a lot of companies that are putting out their information sheets that they say are voluntary. As far as, do you have this. If you do see that, and I've even had hospitals put these out, you need to report that to the EEOC because that's the only way we can say, listen, this is forcing disclosure. Even though it's voluntary, you'll never find out whether you got the job, didn't get the job because of that or not. And also, you can disclose your disability anytime after hiring. Okay, it does not have to be at the point of hire. It doesn't have to be at the job point of acceptance. If you don't need any accommodations at that time, you don't need any. But say something happens a year later, and all of a sudden you're noticing you're having memory difficulties, or you're starting to have some focals. Okay, yes, you can disclose at that point, and that's definitely your protection. And what accommodations do you need?
I do just want to say real quick, two things. One, sometimes you can give them your state ID. Whenever they ask for a driver's license, I think in some ways the word driver's license is like, the word Kleenex. We just say it as the overarching term, but really they want your ID. So you can take in your passport, you can take in your state ID. But actually, when they're asking you if you have a disability on a job application, it's because they take federal funding as part of affirmative action. They're actually seeking you. You actually get a heads up. If you go to usajobs.gov, which is the federal, there's something called a Schedule A. If on the right-hand side you see all these boxes you can click for different kinds of jobs. One of them is a person who is a chair user. You click that, that means they're looking actively for people with a disability. So you hear people talking about hiring veterans. You will get preferential treatment that actually helps you. So if you see if they ask you that at an interview, that's illegal. But on a job application, it's up to you. You don't have to say yes, but it actually helps you.
So my child with epilepsy is still young, but I worked for a staffing agency, and I know that a lot of them are popping up all over the place. One of the things that we asked applicants was if they had reliable transportation, and if they did, what kind. And I know that I didn't make the rules, so I couldn't change this, but unless it was their own vehicle with a driver's license, they did not get preference for jobs. So unfortunately, I couldn't change that. I no longer work there, but so I don't really know if they have to disclose if it's their own reliable, their own vehicle, because there are multiple different ways to get around. I just wanted to let people with older kids know that.
Are there any specific scholarships through the Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, or maybe national scholarships for kids that should be seniors that are now in the process of applying, and what are the dates, the due dates?
Yeah, we have the Dakota Pequeño Memorial Scholarship. Not sure what the date is. I think typically, we just awarded it, so I think it's typically an early spring deadline, like March maybe. And that has provided two $1,000 scholarships. There's also UCB, which is a pharmaceutical company, has a UCB family scholarship. For I think that's a $5,000 scholarship. So there are a few epilepsy-specific ones. You can also check specifically with particular universities that you're applying to. Some of them will have ones that are designated only if you go to that university. We have a few of them on our website. So under our website, under programs and services, there's you can click on scholarships and you can get information on all of that.
I can't say anything about dates for these, but certainly even if you are just looking up online for epilepsy or general disability scholarships. There are lots of them out there. And many of them you can write specifically about your disease process, which made it easier for me to do because I felt like I was writing to people who would understand what I was talking about, since that's what the whole process of the scholarship was. It's talking about how, yes, I want to continue, I want to go on to college, I'm excited for what's coming up, even if I have seizures. Saying that that's not the whole part of your life. But you can take advantage of your disability and use it for things like scholarships.
Okay. Yeah.
One thing I saw on my on job application, my son was looking for his first job, and I thought it was very creative how they worded things, and I don't remember it exactly, but it was something like, have you missed more than 4 consecutive days of was work or school in the last year or 2 years? And if so, when and why? And I thought, boy, that is really sneaky.
Well, so I get it. From a parent standpoint, I get it. From an employment standpoint, I also get it. But what they're really doing there, it's kind of why they ask for a driver's license, they're not thinking disability, they're thinking responsibility. So like, reason why partly they ask you for your driver's license, they're not thinking like, oh, people lose their license because of epilepsy. They lose their license because of DUIs, and running a background check costs at least $15 to $45. So they're kind of already, and that's part of what they're doing, is they're looking at your work ethic. So then you have a decision. You know, you can say, why are they asking me this question? They're asking me this question about responsibility. Have I ever missed school because I'm irresponsible? No. So no. Or you write a nice little essay at that point to attach to it. And yes, you've disclosed at that point. But what I would say too is, do you really want to work someplace that's not going to accommodate you? Is it really worth your energy? I personally, but I get it, it's a reality, and not all employers really understand, but when you see weird things like that, it's because they've gotten burned, and their intention isn't to really, I would say most times, I don't really believe that it's to discriminate, it's more to filter out, because you might be surprised. It is really hard to find people to show up to work on time, not disability-related issues. And I go out and I talk to employers and I say, what kind of person are you looking for? And it doesn't matter if we're looking at a Burger King or we're looking at like a white-collar job. One of the first things they say, is, I need someone who's going to show up on time and keep their mouth shut and not cause me drama. I think, seriously, this is what I've heard people say. So that's why they're asking that question. So then at that point, I think you can make an informed decision on how you want to answer it.
Yeah, I think there are a few exceptions where it might make sense to disclose during an interview or during the application process. An example might be if, for instance, you have word finding difficulty related to your epilepsy, or maybe you're on topiramate or something like that, and you just really struggle with word finding, and if you disclose that that's the reason why, that's maybe a better reason for them than what they might imagine. If they don't know, they might assume that, well, this is a sign of some much more global cognitive difficulties that you're having, rather than a side effect of a medication. So also, if you were interviewing for Epilepsy Foundation of Michigan, we would want to know if you have epilepsy, because that would be something, or any disability-related agency, that could be an asset for you. So there are some exceptions. Other questions?
I think the hard part, one, is when you are filling out an application and there's screening process and something is disclosed, okay, it doesn't allow time for, if they're going to weed some things out, regardless of whether it's due to, I want somebody here on time, and make an assumption that because someone doesn't drive, they can't be here on time all the time or be reliable. It doesn't allow for a person to explain what they have to help them meet that needs of that employer. I don't think it's given a chance. So I think we've got to find a way around that, so that we, aren't forced to disclose too early. ruled out and not get to know us as a person and what our assets are and how reliable and what we have advantage of. And that's where the fine line comes.
Yeah, there's a lot of gray areas when it comes to disclosure. So, other questions?
I guess I just wanted to ask the question about the clinical neurology evaluation that is done through K through 12, and then they're transitioning over to college. How exactly would that play? Who would use that information? I guess, would it be you, or would it be, obviously not a professor, but how do you implement that?
Okay, that's a great question. So we have students that come in all the time and they bring their IEPs. IEPs end at high school. 504s end at high school. If I could have any job in the world, I would go around to every high school in America and tell them that IEPs and 504s end at high school. Because a lot of times high school counselors will tell them they continue until their entire education experience. They don't. What colleges use are any type of assessment that has been done to see what the deficit is, the need is, the special circumstance is. So at Oakland, I can only speak to what we do, but at Oakland, if you had an IEP and it was for a learning disability, learning disabilities don't change over time. So if the last time you had a neuropsych eval was when you were in 6th grade, I'll take it. Because I'm not going to burden you and say, hey, go get another one done at $5,000 a pop. And it's going to say the same thing because the same thing is happening. If you have a psychological thing going on, depression, ADD, anxiety, PTSD, any of those things, they can fluctuate over time. Some people with ADHD are not diagnosed in K-12, but they are in college. It might be the opposite. We require something that's within the first or the last 3 years, because then that would be current. Medical conditions. If you're actively having treatment and it's something that is going on with you presently, we ask for something from your doctor within the past, usually 1 to 3 years, depending on what you're asking for. If you have any assessments that say what your memory, like a lot of times look at baseline tests, students will, and then as they progress through their disease, they get new ones done to see if it's gotten worse, if it's gotten better, things like that. Anything we can use, we will use. Colleges are all different. The Eastern Michigan I'll give you another example. They don't require documentation. They say that what the student reports is good enough. That's like a real outlier. Whereas most colleges want some kind of documentation of something that is going on, that they can use that. And it depends on what you're asking for. So like if you have your IEP with you, and it's not your last one. The last IEP that you get in high school is called the transition IEP. The transition IEP, for me, does nothing. It says what you want to be when you grow up, where you want to live, what your career goals are. Those are all awesome things, but it doesn't help me provide you services. So what I will tell them is get an IEP that was before that. Maybe, in 9th or 10th grade you were retested. Maybe in middle school you were retested. At any of those times, if that IEP has that testing information in it, we'll use it. If you don't have an IEP that has that testing information, but you went through a private psychologist or somewhere just to see what was going on and you have that report, that's even better. The only people who have access to it in our office is myself and my director. Professors cannot ask to see information. They cannot ask why somebody gets accommodations. And not very often, but sometimes they do. I don't think they do it coming from a bad place, but they'll say, well, Sue came in and gave me her accommodation letters and she gets attendance leniency. Why does she get that? And I will very nicely say, she gets it based on her condition. That is not something that you have privy to that information. It'd be better if we just focused on how you could help her. But the information also stays in a locked file cabinet in our office, and it's destroyed 5 years after the student leaves. So that's kind of what happens to all of the information.
Okay, so in some of the colleges, I know they get federal funding based on that. So in your particular case with Oakland University, you guys don't, you can have it as long as they have an IEP, it's not a big deal because the federal funding will accommodate any special programs that you guys are dealing with?
Federal funding doesn't affect us. The services that we provide in terms of accommodations, that is all we do is provide the classroom and housing accommodations. So if you have an IEP, and it does, we will use the information in the IEP. It's not, we are not using the IEP itself. We're using that testing information that's in it, those scores that show that your intelligence level is this number, but your achievement number is this number, and there's a deficit there, and that your memory and processing speeds are really low. So if you took a timed 1 hour test, you'd never be able to finish it because it takes you about double time to process it based on your intelligence level. We look at all of those things, and it does not have anything to do with federal funding at our college.
Okay, so you guys do assessment as well at the beginning, that's what.
I know how to, and in private practice can do assessments. I cannot at the university because it's a conflict of interest. So if a student comes in and says, I don't know what's going on and I need some kind of help, we'll send them to either their private care physician, or we do have, we do call you guys. A lot of times they have a case with you guys open and we can get the information with them from that. Or we'll send them to our counseling center on campus. They do have psychologists, psychiatrists, and therapists that can do it there as well at a discounted rate.
Also, I just want to say, that's like something a parent can request as you start to transition out of high school, if you go to a public high school. A lot of times, they will ask you, and a lot of times parents say, no thank you, because what's the point, we're leaving. I would think twice about that and maybe take it, but also that's like another piece where MRS can come in and do, because for our eligibility purposes, our testing is only valid for 3 years also. So that's something that sometimes MRS will pay for if there's evidence that MRS can support higher education. So I just want to use a bunch of ifs with that, but that is something that we do and then can send to the university.
And we do have a lot of students who have evals done through MRS and come in with that information all the time. For K through 12, at least in the state of Michigan, the layman's words for the law are once per building. Elementary, middle school, and high school, I always recommend to students who are college shopping to have that evaluation done. The schools are getting, they're getting funding for it. They're getting paid for it whether it's done or not. My son hates the fact that I'm going to make him do it again in high school because I know in college he's going to need accommodations. So I want the most updated evaluation that I have to get him services because I know what they're going to ask him for. They might hem and haw and say, oh, well, nothing's really changed. We gave him this reading test. We gave him this test. It's pretty much the same. As a parent, be a bugger and keep insistent for it. They have to do it.
I can say I learned that it also helps to sometimes take things into your own hands as the student. I went to all of my professors and openly said, I have epilepsy, and explained the situation, and found none of them decided, oh, that means you shouldn't be in this class, or that means that, decided that they didn't like me or anything like that. So it's part of heading off to college is learning to be independent and figuring out that oftentimes just asking your professor for help can make a big difference. Even if you don't specifically have a letter from your doctor or anything like that, professors oftentimes, they want to see you succeed. So just asking in general can make a big difference.
Elizabeth, can you talk a little bit about how you handled disclosure of epilepsy and seizure first aid with friends and roommates and that sort of thing, and then also how you adapted to all of the triggers that can be very common and at a higher level in college, like stress, sleep deprivation, alcohol, things like that.
Well, I certainly learned right away that with people like your roommates who you're going to be with a lot, it helps just to right when you meet them, be honest about it. It can be hard to acknowledge something like a disease process, but Your roommates are gonna be spending a lot of time with you, and it really helps if they know how to react, because especially if you're someone who has quite a few seizures, you don't want them to start calling an ambulance if all of a sudden you can't respond. You don't want to make it into a huge deal like your epilepsy defines your life. So try not to make it seem like that's who you are, but it's part of your living situation. And definitely I took advantage of my seizures as a way to explain certain things in terms of say, okay, sorry, I'm not gonna go to that party, I need to get sleep, because otherwise I'm not going to be doing well, or I could have some seizures. Or no, I am not taking drugs or doing alcohol, because that's a great way to have things happen with my epilepsy. So sometimes you can use it as something to take advantage of, as, I don't want to say an excuse, but a reason behind not doing something. And when it comes to telling people like your friends, you want to find people who are your friends and are there for you. If they don't want to be your friends based on you having seizures, then they're probably not the kind of people that you want to find as your friend group that you make it through college with, that they're there to help you regardless of what's going on. So in general, I just learned that it's best to be open about it, don't try and hide it, so then all of a sudden when you do have a seizure, or if you have a seizure, that, oh, it's the end of the world, everything's changing because you have a disability. We didn't know that. Because yeah, things change when you're going to college, and in general, since you're going to be more independent, but that's when you just have to stand up for yourself and find people to help you, and the organizations around campus that can definitely help you too, and to make the transition process easier. There's definitely lots of help all around for you.
Thanks. Other questions or comments? Anyone have anything to share from maybe having dealt with any of this before with another student or another sibling or another child?
Can I add a couple things?
Yeah, absolutely.
On a college campus, most of the professional staff are not medical professionals. It's our policy at Oakland that if someone is unresponsive, whether it's because of a seizure, it could be they fell on, they tripped and they fell and got knocked out, anything. Anybody who is unresponsive, we do call 911. So just to give you an idea that being a public place, we want the best for our students, and we aren't medical professionals. Most of us wouldn't know what to do in that instance. And a lot of our seizure students will tell me, that's a problem for them, because a lot of times they'll be fine in 5 minutes. But a lot of times something could happen and they won't. And we don't ever want to take their care for granted. So we do always call 911. We have several students who 911 will get there. They will do an assessment of themselves, as they have the many different times they've had seizures, and they will refuse transport. They'll say, you know what, I'm okay. I'm fine, thank you guys for coming. I'm good and I'm okay. But there was one time that a student did have a seizure in a classroom, and it was in a stadium seating area, so like everyone was sitting really, really close, and they did hit their head on a desk. And they have had seizures on campus all the time, and they always refused transport. They were always fine. After this time, they weren't. And we don't ever want to take that chance with your children that, they're adults, but what if something happened? So our policy is that you always call 911, just for that. When you're with roommates and friends and things like that, you get to be a little bit closer, but I wouldn't know one student from another, walking up to them on campus, to see them have a seizure or be unresponsive. We always call 911, just to give you an idea. And then also, application-wise, you guys might be way ahead. This might be a way ahead for you guys, but don't disclose disability on college applications. If you use them in undergrad, and then you apply, say you want to be a nurse, or you're going to be a lawyer, or you're going to do something where you have to apply to a college, we can't disclose that to a future college. So we can't say to the law school, hey, they had a disability. You don't need to say it either until you've already been admitted, and then you get the accommodations. So similar to jobs, don't disclose those things, you don't need to, there's no reason they need to know that, they need to know how well you do at school, period. So don't disclose those things once you get in, once you've got your start, then come and see a person like me and get what you need to help be successful.
And as Christy was talking about, that's why it oftentimes is beneficial to explain to professors and people around you what type of seizures you have. For example, I just essentially feel like I'm in a dream. And normally those last maybe a minute, and afterwards I'm fine. So, and sometimes I'll have days with 3 of those or so. And generally it doesn't help if you have people thinking that they need to call 911 3 or 4 times a day. So it just helps if those around you know your situation, not just that you have seizures. That can make it seem like a much bigger deal than it could be based on your actual situation.
And can you talk about kind of the decision for those who maybe aren't considering college, the decision to carry on and continue receiving services beyond the age of 18 through the school system versus trying to go into the workforce, and just how families can make those decisions?
When you say staying, you mean like if someone's under a certificate of completion and stays like up to 26?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get overly involved in those conversations. I go to IEPs and I'll sit there, but I more come involved when they're already at a transition center and we're deciding when are we going to leave. And so that's really based on, I'm trying to think, like disability in general, sometimes it's like it has a lot to do with soft skills. With epilepsy, that's not so much the case, but it's just looking at like how vocationally prepared are they? Have they had a job? Are they on a path employment-wise that they want to be at, meaning if they're kind of looking at a career and stepping stones. That's what I do a lot with people as they're leaving. You know, I always tell people we got to get on a ladder because no one just starts here. So where are we at, and are we starting to climb that ladder so that you can have self-sufficiency, because that is a common goal for most people. So I don't know if I have a good answer for you. I guess it just kind of was always case by case, and it kind of just depends on what kind of milestones we're hitting. That is the nice thing about Michigan is you can stay till you're 26. That's not the situation in most states, and so MRS really starts. I'll have cases of people, but we really start kicking in more so when you're going to leave public education. So if you're leaving under a certificate, usually you won't come to a vocational rehab case until you're getting ready to leave.
About 5 minutes left. Any other questions? Anne, can you talk a little, just briefly about Michigan Career and Technical Institute and what services they offer?
One of my favorite topics. So the state of Michigan owns a school, we call it MCTI, stands for Michigan Career and Technical Institute. It is in Plainwell. If you're asking yourself where is that, it's kind of between Kalamazoo and Grand Rapids. So it is a school, there's other ways to get there, but it's owned by MRS. So typically most people have a VR case with either Michigan Rehab or the Bureau for Blind Persons or the VA. And I think the average age there is about 19, 20, but you can go there regardless of your age. You live in a dorm, and it's a vocational school, so there's 12, 13 programs. Don't quote me, I'd have to look. But people go there usually for 5 weeks and do what we call a career assessment. So they're just spending 5 weeks doing a lot of assessment. And then also kind of helping with independent living skills, because you have to get up and go to the cafeteria and eat your meals and get around on your own and be on time. And then they're deciding kind of what would be a good vocational fit. And then, so there's like, there's a woodworking, cabinet making program that's actually really good. People usually on average leave $17, $18 an hour getting jobs for like custom home builders to build kitchen cabinets. There's a printing program. A lot of people get hired by Kellogg, work in their printing, make cereal boxes, that kind of stuff. office repair, get jobs with Xerox, go around and fix people's copiers at various businesses. So that sometimes is people's career pathway. Sometimes that's the stepping stone. People will go to MCTI, get their feet wet, get a job, and then go to community college and move on. There's like a pharmacy tech program there too. So everything's, disability related there. So there's a lot of support and, on-campus services with healthcare, therapy, all that kind of stuff. But it is free. It's funded through your Michigan Rehab case. So that can also be another good bonus. And so if you go on, I have my cards if anybody wants them. If you go on to the state of Michigan website, mi.gov/MRS, on the left-hand side, there's a toolbar and one of them says MCTI, and then that can give you a bunch of information.
Great. All right, well, I think we will go ahead and wrap it up. So thank you so much to our panelists for a final session. Let's give them a round of applause.